You can take Bitcoin's CAGR, cumulative annual growth rate, and put in 1/10 of a Bitcoin, 10 grand, and then put in for what I'm going to say is 20 years, okay? Because that's when it just goes insane. If you use 55%, it comes out to 64 million bucks. I'll tell you right now, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Bitcoin's going to $1 million a coin. And I think that we are seeing the tip of an iceberg going forward. What was MicroStrategy is going to become the world's largest bank. I'm a big fan, a big believer in the Bitcoin ETFs. It has onboarded a group of investors that we would never have seen. And I can prove to you that they're not just big institutions. In fact, almost all of them are either plebs, or high net worth individuals, because that's currency. And this is just paper. It's nothing. It's nothing here. It's only enforced by violence. I have transitioned totally to Bitcoin. Once you understand Bitcoin, you realize you just got the royal flush. So I just pushed all my chips in some time ago. That's all I got. I just have Bitcoin.
Mr. George Bodine, thank you so much for joining me, being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Oh, I appreciate it. We're going to have a great time today. Like I used to say in the Navy, we are going to set condition zebra and brace for impact. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. This is a really exciting time. I don't know how people are sleeping at night personally, so there's a lot to talk about.
I really don't. I mean, let's start right there. It's we're touching your story a little bit. You're an ex-fighter pilot. A naval aviator. That's for those Top Gun fans. I would love for you to touch on that. It sounds like you were just talking about maybe bracing for impact, bracing for a crash. But I would love, people that have heard your story, you've talked about your story been in other pods. I would love for you to touch on some of this.
I'm hopeful. I mean, I feel like Bitcoin can fix this. I mean, I think that Bitcoin, can eventually fix a lot of these issues. Bitcoin's not going to cure disease. I'm not, an idiot on that. But the thing is that it can cure a lot of these ills that we're discussing. And, talking about the history of the country, and I'm going to talk about gold for just a minute, but, remember that any hardcore Bitcoiners out there, just remember that at one time, gold was hard, sound money. And even though there seems to be this like butting heads with gold bugs, you have to realize that a lot of that is theater. It's people like Peter Schiff who are disingenuous. I basically think he's just a liar anyway. I think his family probably holds Bitcoin. It's theatrics, it's followers. I don't know what the hell he's doing, but he's caused it's caused a rift that doesn't really need to exist. I mean, gold bugs, real gold bugs that believe in hard, sound money, that understand the history of gold in currency, besides being money, they're just Bitcoiners. I mean, they're Bitcoiners. They just don't know it yet. And they're either going to make it here, or because they're getting older, they're just going to die and move on. And then we'll have a new breed. And this breed, like yourself, younger people, they're going to be fixated on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the digital gold, way more than that, but that's just one role it plays. And I can prove what I'm saying because, if you look at world reserve currencies, which the dollar is, that little piece of paper, but if you look at world reserve currencies, the first real currencies based on gold were probably the Florence florin and the Venice ducat. And they were about the size of a dime, pure gold. I mean, pure gold. And they lasted for hundreds of years, a couple hundred years, until Napoleon came into Venice and took over the city, and then took those beautiful horses. I don't know if you've ever seen those brass horses that are there in the Piazza San Marco. It's just, But anyway, so that's when it collapsed. The real first world's reserve currency, though, was probably Spain's, and that was the silver and gold. So they were bimetallic. And that's the Real de Ocho, which is the pieces of 8. So if you've got any pirate movies that you've ever watched, pieces of 8, that's what they're talking about. And you can actually cut that thing, they used to, into pieces of 8. And then the escudo, which was their gold coin. So let's talk about that, because here's what happened. And I promise I'll relate to this to Bitcoin. But it wasn't necessarily a successful 200-year reign of gold, even though that's how long their world reserve currency lasted. They were getting that gold from the New World and under brutal, horrible things that they did over there. But they got their gold. They brought it back. And guess what? When one of those big galleons of gold arrived and docked, they had tremendous price inflation. I mean, in fact, it was called the price revolution. And it infiltrated their whole society. And Everybody wanted their gold, so they exported their gold out of their country to buy things. They didn't even need to really produce things. It's what happened over a period of a century was they really undercut their small traders, their small townsmen, craftsmen, people that made things. And if this sounds familiar, there's a reason why. And what's really sad, and the reason it didn't work, is because that gold wasn't evenly distributed. That wealth was not evenly distributed. Government, if anybody close to that galleon, think of it as a cantillon effect. Anybody close to that galleon when it came in there got the gold first, and including the government, but also the royal family. And what's really sad about it is it gave them so much wealth that they were engaged in a whole series of endless wars. They just endless wars. And as Saylor was pointing out recently, eventually they lost their gold because it got seized when they made port up there in, I think it was near London. And but then on the other flip side, and I promise I won't go much longer, but on the other flip side of this, let's take a look at our country and let's take a look at gold where it was successful. You know, in 1792, we passed the Coinage Act, and we were on a bimetallic standard also. Silver and gold, but gold eventually won out. 1821, the Bank of England was on pure gold. That backed their currency. By the time of the Civil War, most of the major countries were on a gold or bimetallic standard. By the time World War I came along and the Fed was formed, we had 59 countries that were on that standard. Well, guess what? And let's just talk about that standard for a minute. Let's talk about what we did. Okay, this is called the Second Industrial Revolution on hard, sound money, not this shit that we got out there right now. Hard, sound money, and gold and silver for all those Bitcoin maxis that hate gold bugs. You know, we invented steel, but not just steel, but Bessemer steel, and then stainless steel. So we developed skyscrapers, elevators, we developed ocean liners, steam locomotives, the internal combustion engine, the automobile, the assembly line, the airplane. I mean, all these things, the transcontinental railroads stretching all over the place. The telegraph, the wireless telegraph, the telephone, the electric light bulb. We made a Atlantic telegram cable that connected us, and money changed then big time. AC power, photography, typewriters, sewing machines, the harvester, the reaper, the tractor. I mean, all of these things were developed. And then what happened in 1913? The Fed was formed. By 1914, the world had entered war, World War I. It killed like 10 to 15 million combatants, about the same number of civilians, left people with, 10 to 15 million people came back with horrible wounds, missing legs, arms, and everything else, and some more important parts. And what happened? How did World War I stretch for 4 years with all those major nations that were on a gold standard or hard money standard? How did they manage to get all that armature, weapons, people, transport, and just engage in endless death? They did it because they went off the gold standard. They printed money. And at the end of World War I in 1918, all those central bankers, you know what they wanted to do? They wanted to go back to gold. You can see it. You can read about it. There's a great book, Lords of Finance. I've just finished it not long ago, that discusses that. And so what happened? They printed so much money, they couldn't. They tried to go back to the gold standard, and they weren't willing to debase their currencies to actually match that. This has become a long rant. I'll take a break here. All right.
It makes me think of the War is a Racket, the book from, I think it was 1932, that Smedley Butler was, writing about a lot of this stuff, which, again, obviously the Fed, what happened there, enriching all these companies, kind of like that, the origins of the military industrial complex, and what Eisenhower, which you alluded to earlier, what he was speaking of. But it's fascinating. You look back to J.P. Morgan, the Lords of Finance. Those are such good books. There's so many. I think Tycoon's another one. There's a bunch of those books that are so good, and they talk about J.P. Morgan. And I was just in the Titanic conspiracy theory rabbit hole the other day. Of J.P. Morgan had the ticket on the Titanic, and then he dropped out last second. He owned a bunch of the White Star Line stuff, and a bunch of the opponents of the Federal Reserve were on the Titanic and went down with the Titanic. So you just, it's wild to, but you, again, going back to the money, I didn't learn this stuff until I was in Bitcoin. I was very political for so long, for years, like we talked about earlier. And you can't see it from politics. You cannot, if you're in a political realm of red versus blue, you cannot see these things. And only until you will start learning Bitcoin and get into the Bitcoin rabbit hole can you really start seeing, and the scales come off of your eyes of, holy cow. Like, again, the documents of this country are unbelievable and make it exceptional, but the people inside of it can do really bad things. The government itself can do really bad things. And I think that's what people are starting to learn and understand, to a lot of this is what you're alluding to. So it really is this learning process that everyone's starting to go through and really getting a crash course right now with all the files that are being dropped by Musk in the game.
Well, let's zoom out and let's talk about Bitcoin and put it in the context of what we were saying, which is, this system is broken. This system is not working now the way it's set up. I'm not saying it can't limp along. I'm not saying the dollar is going to go away. I'm not saying that the world's reserve currency is going to collapse. None of that stuff. But we just know that this system is not working, especially it's not working for just ordinary people. I mean, you look at, the ordinary working American. First off, we don't make stuff anymore. And I can prove that too. When we, well, it was basically Clinton and the party in power at the time. And this is not a political discussion, but the Democrats, at the time, there was a push to get China into the World Trade Organization in 2000, most favored nation status, then afterwards. And at the time, they produced 6% of the world's goods. Today, they're exporting up. In another few years, they're going to be at 50%. And that's in a period of just a couple of decades. So where did that manufacturing come from? It came from us. After World War II, we weren't a deficit nation. We weren't. After Bretton Woods is started this slide into basically us exporting dollars and importing things. And it's caused so much damage and so much pain for people. You look at the average working family today, say a couple of parents and their kids, 2 kids. What kind of life do they have? Both of them have to work. I mean, they're in a hamster wheel. They're running their ass off. Sometimes, my daughter one time, we have a lot of kids. My daughter one time had like 3 jobs that she was juggling around. You look at the price of healthcare. I mean, it's just off the charts. And, if you want to try to do something out of school, or if you want to try and stay home, or if you want to do, a nanny, have a nanny or something, it's just unaffordable. So I am hopeful that Bitcoin can somehow eventually become this reserve. This is a great chance for us to talk about some of the shit that's been going on here since President Trump came into office. Nick Carter wrote an article about a month prior to him coming into office, arguing against Bitcoin being included as part of the strategic reserve. And we're going to have a lot of different terms come up here. I'll try to clarify them or try and keep them consistent. And, his idea was that Bitcoin would basically weaken the dollar, that it would weaken faith in the US dollar from around the world. I disagree with that. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the assets that we hold in these reserves, we hold gold. And why would we hold gold? In fact, if you look at other nations, you look at Russia, India, and China, what have they been doing over the last decade? They've been stacking gold like a son of a bitch. And they're not doing it to weaken their currency. What they're really doing is they're trying to find assets that somehow can strengthen their currency. I think Bitcoin is that asset. I think Bitcoin can do that. I would like to see Bitcoin in a strategic reserve. Now, unfortunately, what we saw in the executive order that came out about 48 hours after President Trump took office, that was not what I was hoping for. This executive order establishes a digital asset stockpile, which I just think of it as like degen asset shit pile, because that asset stockpile of digital assets, there's only one that needs to be in there. It's Bitcoin. There is no other asset that you're going to find that can hold a candle to Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin and Bitcoin only that belongs in that reserve. Senator Lummis gets that. The other problem is that, of course, even if he had gone along and named Bitcoin as part of a strategic reserve and that we started allocating to it, which we didn't, by the way, means that whoever comes in next in office, I mean, they could immediately overturn that and we'd just be sitting there, with our fingers somewhere. So I want us to see something passed in legislation now. That's my push. I've written both my senators, I've written my House rep, which, by the way, my House rep is Thomas Massey. So I'll bet Thomas Massey agrees with me, but he hasn't come out and said so, but I'll bet he will. But everyone that's listening or watching this, you need to write these people. And it does make a difference. And why? Because we want to get the Bitcoin bill passed by Senator Lummis. The problem with Senator Lummis's bill is that right now she doesn't have any co-sponsors. We need to get other members of Congress that are signing on to this bill. She needs to have some co-sponsors. She needs help here. And the Bitcoin community can make that happen. But I want to see this occur. And, I'm not for liquidating gold or for revaluing gold. Well, actually, the gold certificates, revaluing, that could make sense. But I don't want to see us liquidating gold in order to get Bitcoin. I want Bitcoin in that pile. I want us to start committing to that. And I honestly believe that someday in the future, that's going to make a big difference for our country. I believe in Bitcoin. I believe it can fix money. And it can be the base layer to our currency, because money and currency are not necessarily the same thing. Money is portable, fungible, divisible, verifiable, scarce. It can be durable, seizure resistant. It's all these things. Currency is just that piece of paper, that piece of shit. Like what I've got in my pocket right now, this thing. That's currency. And this is just paper. It's nothing. It's nothing here. It's only enforced by violence. And I want to see Bitcoin as part of I want to see Bitcoin as part of our reserve assets and our currency. That's enough of a rant there. Jeez, maybe I should stop drinking coffee.
No, it's beautiful. This is exactly what this is for, George. This is we need more of this in the world. And again, what I love is that guys like you, Larry, Bob Burnett, Greg Fosses of the world. There's these gentlemen or ladies that are older than, I'll say 50 or 60. I feel like that I say 50 or 60 because I feel like that's a good enough time to have lived where you've experienced a lot of things and you've seen a lot, but then there's a number of you that have changed, the humility to change, which I think is just absolutely fascinating, because there's less layers for like a younger person. There's less layers to go through, to unwind, to unlearn things. And I think that's where guys like you and gals like you, it really is fascinating. And I really pay a little closer attention to people that have lived a certain amount of life and then have been able to unlearn things and then relearn. That to me is, again, it shows mainly humility. I think it's not an IQ thing. It's just a humility thing. And I think that's where the true treasure lies. You mentioned about, again, the China. It makes me think of the 1800s, and you mentioned a couple things over the last 10 minutes where China, I believe it was during this bimetallism era, where China got down the silver rabbit hole and kind of sunk their own ship with silver in a way, because they kind of chose silver, at least from my studies and what I saw. And then we were like, oh, we're going gold, England, the British pound, what was happening there. So that's really fascinating. And I agree too. I don't think we need to sell our gold. I mean, again, we have the world reserve currency. You can sit there and sell bonds into the market or whatever you need to do, and then buy. People give you cash or whatever it is. You can get cash and have the printer, and you can buy Bitcoin with it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We've got a printer.
Yeah, exactly. We got the printer. The only thing I can think of is trying to weaken the gold network. Obviously, of hey, we're going to demonetize gold more, and I don't know. I would love for your take on this, George. I actually just thought of it. I was interviewing somebody, and it was, I don't know if it was Peter Dunworth. It was somebody, and they were saying that, which I had not heard anyone say this yet, but if you really want to be, and this is the world we're living in right now, this is how we've been acting, the empire, I guess, which is we could print whatever we want, right? So we could sell the gold sell it in the market, demonetize it a lot, or just really weaken the gold market and leave, China or whoever with it sitting there with the bag, so to speak. Now it is gold. However, we have the printer and we have the biggest army, the biggest navy, the biggest military in the world, Air Force. So we could theoretically go and just take whoever out and take their gold back. So you could demonetize the network. You could print all what you wanted, buy as much Bitcoin as you wanted. And then, oh, by the way, we can now go take out whoever we need to go take the gold back. And so it's if you really wanted to get game theoretical about it, and I was like, yeah, you're right. You are right.
I think you need to go get a urinalysis, because if you're thinking that we're going to go take somebody's gold, I mean, what I want is I want a peaceful. I don't want to take anybody's anything. I want a peaceful revolution here. So
trying to do this peacefully.
China was once up until the great financial crisis, and that's when my world really turned. Up until then, I didn't know obviously I didn't know anything about Bitcoin, but the thing is that I was trapped in that hamster wheel of my own. I was always trying to outrun inflation, the price of money. I was trying to somehow increase my wealth, or even just preserve my wealth. And it was constant work. I mean, it was such a pain in the ass. And, up until the great financial crisis, China had almost $1.3 trillion in US treasuries. Right now, and they saw the writing on the wall, because that's when we really started quantitative easing. And when I say printing, by the way, I'm not talking about rolling off a printing press. I'm talking about all the methods that the U.S. Treasury and the Fed have to increase liquidity. In other words, to put money, whether it's base money or M2, into the system. So, after quantitative easing and basically China could see the handwriting on the wall, they started selling them off. They're down to $760 billion of treasuries. That's the same as Japan now. That's not much. Japan, I think, is still the largest holder, but barely. And do you know who is also one of the largest holders of U.S. treasuries? As an aside here, it's Tether. Tether's got like $115 billion. They have more U.S. treasuries now than Germany. They're way up there in the league.
Wild. But
just getting back to what you were talking there, we can print money. We could basically demonetize gold, I guess, in a game theory. I think that'd be really risky. And gold. Remember, I told you the properties of good money. Not currency, just money itself. And if you look at those, one of them I said was durable. So gold, beats Bitcoin. That is probably, if you've ever watched Chris Kuiper's reports, from Fidelity, and that great chart they have on what makes good money. And Bitcoin is just kicks ass here. Gold can't hold a candle to it, except in one thing, and that's durability. It has a real proven track record. So, again, I'm probably going to bore people here, but let's just look at the history of money for just a minute. I won't go long. Human beings, modern human beings, have been around 300,000 years. And I'm not going to go all that way back, but I will say that you're, a big strapping guy, a hockey player. If you met one of your human ancestors a couple 100,000 years ago, and you're walking along the shores of the Nile and you happen to come across this gal, the two of you are going to recognize each other. She'll probably be smaller, but you'll know who you are. We had Neanderthals living with us during this period in that area, especially up in Southern Europe. Now you wouldn't you'd recognize them maybe, but you'd go, that's not a human. But nonetheless, we were mating together at that time, and we won't go down that rabbit hole. We'll just say that basically during that period, that whole period of time, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, we really didn't need money. We were hunter-gatherers, and we were out there just, killing anything we could. There were real saber-toothed tigers that lived in that period. And if you look at the bone breaks of some of the ancient people, they're pretty brutal. They're almost like rodeo riders. I mean, they were up close doing combat with some of these animals. So, 13,000 years ago, the last ice age, the Pleistocene, melted. And within 3,000 years, all around the world, I mean, in about 5 or 6 places, we transitioned as a human species. We transitioned to farmers. And we could have 2 to 3 more kids. We got bigger. We could form not just clans, but now we form tribes, then tribal nations, city states, region states, and nation states, and empires. And during that whole time, so for the last 10,000 years, that's been what we've been looking for. We have been trying to find money, and we have used every damn thing you can think of for money. Most Bitcoiners already know about the rocks on Yak. They know about shells and bees and every other thing. But we used everything. I mean, leather, uh, even tobacco. We used, and where I come from, we finally figured out that corn was kind of a pain in the ass and to transport around there. So we distilled it into something that was a lot more durable, condensed liquid, and that's whiskey. I've got one of them sitting right back there, Big Nose Kate. She was the girlfriend of Doc Holliday, by the way. Quite a character she was too. She lived all the way up until World War II. Anyway, I don't want to make this too long. So that whole period, and we went through all these different things. And once you get past the collectible stage of a money, you're looking at the next stages. That store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. And the most important in my mind, I know Peter Dunworth was disagreeing a little bit, but the most important for me is that store of value, that base layer. And we eventually, almost worldwide, we came to these base metals, silver and gold. And that's what you were talking about. Well, silver was good for small coinage, small transactions, a primitive lightning system. But gold was the base layer to money. And again, I don't have anything against gold. I've held gold in the past. I've had gold stolen from me, and in physical property, which is always a risk. And so I just don't hold it anymore. I have transitioned totally to Bitcoin. Once you understand Bitcoin, you realize you just got the royal flush. I know I've said this before, but it's true. And if you're in a poker table and you get the royal flush, you better have a good poker face. You better hope that there's a big pile in front of you, because you're not going to stop betting. You won. And if you hold Bitcoin, you've won. So I just pushed all my chips in some time ago. That's all I got. I just have Bitcoin.
I would love for you to. So you brought up something. There's a handful of things I want to talk about here. Just the Tether stuff, something that we'll get into. But you just brought up something that I want to touch on, because we talked about it offline a little bit. But wrench attacks and just security in general, because this goes into part of your story. You mentioned that you have gold stolen from you before, and it's a real thing, obviously. And so I'd love for you to touch on this, because it's part of your story in the sense of you just taking some of your stuff down, right? And I'm taking some of the stuff off my truck. I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin for a while. So I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit.
Well, this is a deep subject, and I think I think that this is probably one of the most important subjects that's going to be coming up in the next cycle, because I don't think we've seen anything yet. Yeah, about a year ago, I'm really into security. I don't know if it's just from being an ex-cop or whatever, or military, but I'm really into security. And like when I walk out of a door, I almost always am looking both directions. I'm the kind of guy that I won't pull up close behind somebody in a line of traffic. I'm always thinking about things. I look to see if people are, when I go into my neighborhood, if I open my garage door, I make sure that I don't see any strange vehicles around, or that somebody's trying to steal the garage code, which I don't know if you're familiar with. I'm not going to talk about that. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is I've always been security conscious. And yeah, I started to withdraw from the Bitcoin community. I had made a conscious decision, and I won't wear Bitcoin apparel right now. And I took off anything that identified Bitcoin, like on my vehicle or anything like that. And, I'm always, and the reason we're having this discussion is because of something called wrench attacks. And if you don't follow, anybody that's listening right now, I strongly suggest that you follow Jameson Lopp on X, LOPP, and you find his website that he maintains listing all the wrench attacks over the years. And they are escalating. They are like one a week right now, which is unheard of. And what I'm talking about is violence against Bitcoiners in order to extract the Bitcoin from them. And these attacks are sometimes horrific. I mean, people are being killed. They are being tortured. We saw the recent one with David Balland, the co-founder of Ledger. And I mean, they cut his finger off. And additionally, they also kidnapped his wife. and then separated them. So I don't know the kinds of things they were talking to him about her. She came out okay, but obviously he's probably traumatized for a long time. And the thing that people have to understand, and I can speak a little from knowledge here, is that most criminals are like dumb as speed bumps. They're just basically idiots. And their easiest method of attack, if they're willing to do so, is just violence against a Bitcoiner. There's no thought process involved in complicated social schemes to, get you to reveal your seed phrase or anything like that. It's just straightforward violence. And here's the thing that criminals are starting to understand is there is an asymmetric reward for people that do this. And why is that? It's the same thing that you just brought up a minute ago. If you have, and gold and Bitcoin are bearer instruments. If you have that Bitcoin in a hardware wallet, you are carrying a bearer instrument. That means whoever possesses it has it. And the reason that somebody got my gold was because of that. It was a burglary. But it's gone. It's gone for good. It's in possession. Now, I'm taking steps to protect myself, and they involve physical security. I've increased things around my home. I removed my hardware wallet from the home, and I'm usually armed. In fact, I've got a weapon on right now. So I just, and I live in a state with a permit. I have a concealed carry permit. And I know some people are going to go, this is silly. But if you just go to this website and start reading, you'll understand that these attacks are increasing and it is going to be a threat vector. And I'm starting to wonder, if some of the things that we've been telling people are not going to carry forward in this next cycle. This is all happening with Bitcoin at 100,000 a coin. Now, I'll tell you right now, there is absolutely no doubt, again, not financial advice, but there is no doubt in my mind that Bitcoin's going to $1 million a coin. None. And I think that we are seeing the tip of an iceberg going forward. I believe that maybe multi-sig, custodial multi-sig might be the wave of the future. Anchor Watch, did you see what they just did, Brandon?
If you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin's going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
They came out with the wallet, and then it's, they have Lloyd's of London guaranteeing the contents of your wallet. And, at some point, people will start to consider this. So I think what I'm trying to say is people need to be more aware of physical security. Now, for me, the reason I'm employing a lot of these techniques is I outed myself, and about a year ago, Larry, I'm friends with Larry Lepard and Bob Burnett, like you mentioned earlier, and Bob kind of gave me the idea that I owe it to people to talk to them about Bitcoin, and I owe it to them to come forward and talk on podcasts. So I'm doing it. And for those who are outed, you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. You're out there. That's it. So, I don't want to scare people. Actually, you know what? Bullshit. I actually do want to scare people. I do want to tell people you need to start be thinking about this. And if you're not, it's something over the next few years. As I said, Bitcoin is going to $1 million a coin. I used to think it was going to be in less than 6 years, maybe 5 years. I'm not so sure. I really don't know where the hell this is going next cycle. I have my theories and different models I follow, but price point, I'm not sure right now. So I'll stop.
Well, well, it makes me think of just the only the paranoid survive, right? And that's kind of how life has always been, really. I mean, it's just kind of human nature. Only people that are on their P's and Q's, like you said, aware, just operational security, just what's happening, their self awareness, what's happening around them. Those are the people that tend to survive. And for thousands of years, like you mentioned, that was how you had to, literally how you had to survive. And now we've been kind of just hoodwinked into this world of the last 100 years of having it so good that you don't have to be aware of your surroundings. You have the safety net of other people to take care of you. If you lose someone scams your credit card, like, oh, I'll get it back. I don't, we're so loose with how we operate that we've lost all sense of being human in a way. And that's what's really scary. And it's like that, it's the one thing that's like, are people always going to want that safety net of like, you know what, I'll pay with my time and energy to be in this system because I just can't be accountable, George. I always need that backup in case someone scams me. Because if I lose it, George. Like if I lose that gold or I lose that wallet, then it's gone. Then what do I have?
It's
I think
gone.
that's this hump that people can't get over mentally. A lot of people.
Well, you can understand that, though. I mean, for instance, you can understand it. Look at it, anybody that's watching this. You can see that I'm a boomer, and at some point, I'm not going to be maybe competent or even maybe able to have the eyesight that can allow me to use a hardware wallet and make a transaction. You remember what it's like when the first time you make a transaction on the base layer? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
scary. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the numbers,
Sweating.
you're checking them out, you're counting, you're going back, you're going, got it. And then you send a little amount, and to see it, and then you sit there and you wait to see if it goes through. I mean, it's difficult. It's trying. And there are organizations that are sending out maybe $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. And I'm often thinking to myself, who the hell is pressing that button? Because whoever it is, he's got balls of cannonballs.
Yeah.
So, I get it. That's why I'm, again, Maxie's if you had poop emojis on here, they would be throwing them on me right now, because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a big believer in the Bitcoin ETFs. I think that it has onboarded a group of investors that we would never have seen. And I can prove to you that they're not just big institutions. In fact, almost all of them are either plebs, or high net worth individuals, because Van Eck, and then another organization, but Van Eck, an analyst was just on about 6 weeks ago. And he said, for the first time I heard it, he said, our analytics show that the Bitcoin ETFs are being bought by retail, 80%. So that's amazing. And that is a strong underlying bid that will not stop. It's just relentless. Those ETFs have accumulated 1.2 million Bitcoin since their inception. That's unbelievable. And
Wow.
there are going to be a lot of people that are never able to do what you and I have done. They just are never going to get to that point where they can get a hardware wallet. Now, surprisingly enough, maybe what I'm discussing, whether it's Casa or Unchained chain, maybe this is the wave of the future. A single entity, a custodian with multiple wallets over geographically dispersed locations that is holding Bitcoin. Maybe that'll work. I don't know. But I hold a lot of my Bitcoin in ETFs, and it's very safe for me. And here's another thing. It's very easy for transfer when it comes to my finally crossing the river Styx and leaving this place behind. That's a way for my heirs to have an easy transfer of my wealth. And so I just think that we need to have a really open, not just open mind, but we need to be inquisitive right now. We need to start, building solutions to this. And they are. These solutions are being built. There are new products coming out all the time that are addressing both what I'm talking about, physical safety, but also the concerns around custody. And I think we're on the tip of the iceberg again. I think we haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about we were talking about politicians and Thomas Massey writing him and writing your local representatives, and there's a lot of people. This is the thing I didn't understand for a long time. Like again, I was telling you how political I was when I was a kid, and I remember my early recollection of libertarians at the time. Many of them were, "I'm not voting. I'm not voting. I'm not voting. It's a scam." Blah blah blah, and they were right that it was a scam. but I never believed that they were right in not voting, because politics is downstream from culture. And I think that's the thing, that when you remove yourself from the system, at least your voice, your wallet, your feet, when you give up these things, you say, I'm just, I'm going to keep buying whatever, even though I don't agree with these people, I'm going to keep buying their product, or you know what, I'm just going to sit here, I'm going to live here still, but I'm not going to move, or I'm not going to vote, like I'm not going to do these things, all these things that you could do to affect change. People give up their agency. And voting's one way, but like, so look at the social pressure just in the last few years. I mean, look what's happening now. And that's because people stood up and said, I've had enough, and overwhelmed the system. Now I contend that there should be much more, and there could be more people, even more pressure to put on politicians and to put on the government, and really, quite frankly, delete 90+% of it. But that's a different story for a different day. But it's right there for everybody. And I think that just like, you make me think of the wallet providers, or custody. Again, I know that self-custody is vitally important. However, at the same time, two things can be true. I mean, most people are not going to understand self-custody. It's like the American founding. 3%, a couple percent of the people fought the damn war. And most people were British loyalists. They were like, oh, whatever. But they got the benefit of having the system eventually. Like, even though most guys were like ratting on the Patriots and like, hey, they're in here, like they still got the benefit of freedom once the Patriots won the Revolutionary War. And I feel like that's quite honestly what's going to happen with Bitcoin. It's going to be a couple percent of the people that drag the rest of the population kicking and screaming across the finish line. Then everyone gets the benefits of a sound money system across the world. But it's for a long time, I know me personally, I was looking for like, oh, this is so easy. People should just be coming to Bitcoin. So it's common sense. Like, once you see it, the wizard behind the curtain is very obvious. And most people they don't care. They can't, they're getting foreclosed on tomorrow. They can't rub two pennies together. So they can't even think about getting Bitcoin, let alone self-custody and what's all going on. So moral of this whole story, though, is custody. I mean, if you're putting pressure on the Fidelities of the world or the ETF providers, and people are diligent, which that's a big ask, as we've seen. But I like, to your point, Bitcoin sound money can help incentivize people to be involved in the system. And if you have more wealth and more purchasing power, then you have more time then to spend on keeping people accountable and making sure the system's running as it should. So I think these things work in conjunction together. Is that how you see it?
Well, it's interesting because I think that this cycle is going to create, and already has. I mean, I think we are going to create a new generation. It might be like the largest wealth transfer over the next 4 years that we've seen in a long time. And so I'm very hopeful that this new generation, people like yourself, younger people, are going to be sound, morally ethical Bitcoiners, and that they're going to change this system that we live in. Because again, I'm not happy here right now. And this is not the world that I want for my kids. And especially, I got grandkids. I don't want those grandkids growing up in this world that is so dysfunctional. So I'm counting on people like yourself to make a difference. And it seems to me like there's a lot of anger right now, but it doesn't seem like it's directed too well as far as being focused on positive things, right? Let's talk. Let's zoom out for a minute. How many people do you think really know about Bitcoin? I mean, if you and I walk into a bus terminal and we look around and we start talking to people, how many people in that bus terminal, say there's 100 people in there, or you go into just any room, how many people do you think you're going to find in there that know, that you can talk to about Bitcoin?
My guess would be there's probably 50 to 75% of the people have heard of Bitcoin. And I would say there's maybe one that you could actually have a conversation like this possibly with.
I think you're right. I mean, I would be shocked if I could find 3 people that I could have a really good conversation with. And if one person really knew things like what we're discussing, base layer, all this stuff, lots of times Bitcoiners, we're all sitting in a circle, we're like in a campfire. And we're all around there. We're roasted marshmallows. They're all orange marshmallows. And we're just talking to each other. It's like back and forth and back and forth. And then if somebody's walking by outside the circle and they look in, they go, boy, those guys, what a bunch of fucking nuts. And we're all in there with our marshmallows having a great time. So what I'm trying to say is that conversation, it's going to start going out. I think we're only, personally, I'm saying that we're around maybe 5% adoption rate right now. You know, I don't think we're much past that. It's like 1999 in my mind in the
Mm.
internet. So we are going to go. And at some point, we're going to cross the chasm. I'm sure you're familiar with that term and the S
Yeah.
curve, cross the chasm. Somewhere between 14 to 16% is when it's going to just take off. I mean, it's going to be mainstream. I don't even know if we'll be doing podcasts like this. People will just
Right.
go, I know everything about Bitcoin I need to know. And I don't know what that future looks like. But when I was talking earlier, that's the future I want. I want the future where Bitcoin is part of the monetary system. It's like the base layer. Maybe it will be a neutral reserve basket. Maybe the US will have had a reset, an actual reset of the currency. And we're on some kind of a neutral reserve basket, almost like after Bretton Woods. You remember
Mm.
Keynes was arguing, I believe, for Bancor, some neutral reserve asset, and that makes a lot of sense because when you think of what happened after Bretton Woods and what I was discussing earlier, the fact that we became a deficit nation exporting everything, uh, that was foreseen at that conference. Triffin's dilemma, the idea that world's reserve currency means that you are going to be exporting your currency for things. The rest of the world's going to want your currency, and they do. The dollar in global trade right now is still dominant, or very well. If you compare it to all the other currencies, it's dominant. And so uh, I don't know what that future looks like. I just know that I want something better than what we've got.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we touched on the CBDCs as kind of a good little segue back to the CBDCs and Tether. There's some talk of like, oh, whoa, all of a sudden is Tether going to be a CBDC thing that everyone's been freaking out about for really for years. I mean, they've been talking about this for a long, long time, years and years. And so now, here we are, kind of on the doorstep of Tether holding a bunch of the treasuries. I would love for you to get just in general. I'm just throwing that out there, but I would love for your thoughts on just Tether and where things could be headed there, and dollar dominance, I guess too, George. I guess because that's part of it. Like, parlaying this dollar dominance thing is wild.
Yeah, you're pushing all the buttons here, and I'm going to get again. I hope people can just kind of listen here because actually, I'll tell you the way to approach this. Okay, this will make it more easy for everybody to get on board. So you remember I mentioned the Bitcoin ETFs. There were a lot of people that opposed Bitcoin ETFs. Options on the ETFs. A lot of people oppose the idea of options coming into the market on the ETFs. We're worried about paper Bitcoin. How would you stop any of those things? How would you? Is there? I'm sure you don't have an answer because, yeah,
I don't know if you
I
can.
don't. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
either. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know of anybody who was complaining or upset about the Bitcoin ETFs. There is no way to stop this. Bitcoin is like a virus and it's on its own path. You and I aren't going to direct it. It's going to go where it does. And the expression Bitcoin is for your enemies. Well,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? That's true.
Yep.
It really is.
Permissionless.
I mean, you can't stop this stuff. So when I talk about Tether, because the biggest news right now in my mind, one of the things that's revolutionary is Bitcoin. Tether moved to El Salvador, their operations. El Salvador has got an incredible digital assets framework, Bitcoin only, that allows all these companies. I mean, it's a real incentive for them to move there, and they are. So Tether goes there, and then on the 30th of January at that conference, they announce Plan B. They announce that they are going to incorporate through the Taproots protocol with Lightning Labs. They are going to incorporate Tether on Bitcoin and more importantly, the Bitcoin Lightning Network. They're going to come on board, and you know, the, there are going to be a lot of people that are unhappy with that idea. But I'm just going to say to them, I'll listen to whatever you want to say, but explain to me how you stop Tether from doing that. And in my mind, you can't. So let's just accept it and let's understand what it means going forward. First off, I do think it's going to be revolutionary for Lightning. Lightning has got some real issues for scalability. Bitcoin, Bitcoin itself has problems in scalability. or speed, however you want to discuss it. That the idea that Satoshi, correctly understood that he was going to have, there's decentralization, security, and then scalability or speed, the trilemma, or the dilemma for the blockchain. And Satoshi, he rightly picked. He said, we're going to have decentralization and security. And speed and scalability will have to be worked out on a different layer. And he talked about this. Hal Finney did too. They already knew that this was not going to work going forward on the base layer. And Lightning, this could provide the liquidity and the channels on board Lightning so that it really scales and it becomes a worldwide layer 2 solution. Because, to establish a channel, you've got to have a 2 of 2 multisig. And the base layer can't handle a lot of transactions. We only do 55,000 blocks a year. You can only stick around 4,000 transactions on it. So that's nothing. It's not enough. And this could give us that ability. So, and then the other thing is, well, you know what? I'll just kind of stop there in a way, because I don't know where this is going with Tether on the base layer. Tether, I'll tell you something. Here's another thing. They've got 100 employees. They did $13 billion of profit last year. And let me ask you something. What kind of inventory do they have? Do they have trucks? Do they have a whole bunch of workers? Obviously not. No, they don't have anything. It's a an intelligent software company, if you will, like Strategy. I mean, and yet they're doing $13 billion worth of business, 100 employees, and they're growing. My God, they've grown 50% in the last 14 months. They're skyrocketing. And this new thing, they're going to get even bigger. And they are a buyer of U.S. treasuries. They hold a tremendous, I told you, it's over $100 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. And they are going to continue. Some of the things that's being discussed right now in Washington is how to incorporate these stable coins into either a digital asset stockpile or strategic reserve. Again, I'm focused on one thing. I want a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I want it Bitcoin only, and that's what I'm pushing for. That's what I'm fighting for. That's what I'm writing for. That's what I want. But these stable coins could be a life raft. And, Paul Ryan, former speaker, I mean, he knows that too. He's out there shilling this idea that, stable coins could save the U.S. dollar. So I'm not alone in being concerned about this. And you mentioned CBDC, because guess what? There are over 100 law enforcement agencies that are plugged into the Tether network. Now, if they come up to Tether and they say, you see George over there? We don't like him anymore. And so whatever, he's doing, I want you to stop him from doing it. They're going to do it. So that's the threat.
It's very, we're in a very interesting world. And it goes back to this diligence thing. Like we were talking about, humans have to, which, I mean, they don't have to, I guess, right? Like history's full of humans just not being accountable and responsible and just destroying themselves. So, I mean, we don't have to. I mean, we can choose to just be animals and not just use our 5 senses and not use our 6 higher faculties of intuition, memory, reason. We can not use those things at all, and we can just get destroyed, I guess. So that's an option too. And, you have this world of not holding people, the politicians, leaders, elected and unelected leaders, feet to the fire because of whatever reason, because of apathy, or because of we don't know enough time, because they're on the hamster wheel, the manual labor hamster wheel, or just trying to keep up with inflation, whatever it is. But boy, do we need to figure one of these ways out. It is fascinating, because just Bitcoin in general, you have how many currencies are out there right now? You have the dollar that's so dominant. But you compared to the other currencies, the other government fiat currencies, and there are many other currencies. So it'll be interesting to say, because if you study money, right, money converges to one. Well, there's a lot of currencies out there. So we finally have the only 2 monies, maybe you could say, maybe you could say 3: gold, silver, and then Bitcoin. So does that money all converge to one here at some point? Is the battle really the monetary premium inside of the fiat currencies and then gold and silver, and then it converges eventually to Bitcoin to be the anchor that kind of anchors the whole system eventually at some point? Because the more I go on, George, I guess where I'm going with this is that, like, what's your timeline for this? Because the more you study this, the more you're in the system, and the more you see it's going on now because of Tether and what's happening and what the administration is doing now, it feels like we're oscillating back and forth between gradually and then suddenly. And hey, this might be around for 100 more years. And like, I don't know what the answer is. Like, you have to hold two opposing opinions in your head at the same time. Either this thing collapses in the next 5-10 years and just like an iceberg flips gradually then suddenly, and we're on a Bitcoin standard, or I don't know, maybe it's 100 more years of us just kind of like building and building and building. And then eventually people are like, I don't know, this system's brutal and we're sick of it. The dollar dominance because of Tether and all these things happening. And then eventually we go to Bitcoin. I mean, where do you fall on that spectrum? Because I keep just violently swinging back and forth.
Well, yeah, another deep question. So, the thing is that, we talked about world reserve currencies. And if you look at history, they die a slow death. They die a death that's decades. And, they often flop around out there like a fish out of water, even after the issuing nation is not a superpower or the world's dominant military power. They still are out there. We're obviously in a really a bad place right now, our country, the U.S., because of our debt. And they are not going to default on that debt. That's not going to happen. Now, some people have talked about maybe growing out of our debt with AI or something like, with productivity. I don't see that happening personally. So, what we're going to end up, I think that we're going to see a period where this continues. This inflation that we're seeing, whether you believe the figures or not, it doesn't matter. We all know that inflation's really high right now. I think that's going to continue. I mean, it's going to go in cycles and it's going to affect some people worse than others. Inflation really are vectors, how you're exposed to inflation within an economy. For me personally, I don't have as much exposure as like that family we were talking about a little while ago, two parents and two kids. They've got a lot of vectors exposed to inflation right now. But so what are they going to have to do? Without getting into the concept of financial repression, I'll just say that in my mind, the U.S. is going to have to continue to debase their currency. And they are going to try and mitigate those inflationary forces as much as they can. And they're going to try to make it acceptable to us going forward. And if they resort to yield curve control like they did in World War II, after World War II, or during the war, if they resort to that, well, we will be aware of it then. And that's where they'll cap yields. They'll force the yields at a certain level, and then they'll just monetize the debt. But you have to, for anybody out there, especially young people, you've got to protect yourself. You're the one, you're the one that's responsible for protecting you. You've got to, you only have 3 things to do. Just look down between your legs, not at your balls or something. Or, I'm sorry, if there are any ladies present, don't just look down. Think of yourself as sitting like on a 3-legged stool. You've only got 3 things to do right now. All you got to do is get Bitcoin. You got to get as much Bitcoin as you can get right now. You've got to hodl the Bitcoin. You got to hold on to it. And people get shaken out all the damn time. And you cannot lose the Bitcoin. You just can't. So you got to know what you're doing. And if you don't have the capability, I talked about multi-sig. There are going to be some people that are thinking about multi-sig on an individual basis. It's somebody in their basement down there and going, I'm going to do multi-sig. Well, if you don't understand multi-sig, for instance, if you don't know what a wallet configuration file is, or the fact that there are 3 XPubs generated in a 3 wallet situation, or you're going to lose your Bitcoin. You're going to screw it up. It's going to be gone. But you cannot lose that Bitcoin. So why are you doing this? Because, and I may be wrong, but if I'm right, and this is the future for us, then it's up to you. And if you are a family member, people are looking up to you. You got to do the right things. You got to think about the future for your family, the people that love you and the people that are counting on you. I suck at orange pilling. I don't know why. Pardon me. But I just suck at it. And I've tried to orange pill my family and they don't get it. I like one. I've got between my kids and son-in-laws and I must have 12 of them. And so nobody's gotten it except one. So, but he's creating generational wealth for his family. I mean, he's doing it. And when I say that, I mean, Bitcoin is, when I say $1 million a coin, it's going there. That I am absolutely certain of. And then once it gets there, it's going to keep going. It's not going to stop. So I may not be here, but for the rest of you, you're going to see this. I mentioned this once in a podcast and I got a lot of pushback and probably for a good reason, but I'm going to say it again and then I'll try and explain myself better. Right now with Bitcoin at 100,000 coin, you can get a tenth of a Bitcoin for 10,000 bucks. During this last cycle, Bitcoin's volatility can be sickening. I mean, there have been times when I bought Bitcoin in its volatility, especially as it was collapsing, where I almost felt like I needed to go for a walk and maybe I was going to throw up or something. So it can be really difficult to hold on to. And in fact, usually that's a great time to buy. I remember in this last cycle, Bitcoin was dropping. I had bought all the way up to like 60,000 because I just cause. And I kept buying all the way down. And then finally it got down to around 20, maybe 22,000. And I still was buying once in a while, but it was getting increasingly uncomfortable. I was almost becoming mentally challenged because I remember one night in particular, I was, it must have been 3 a.m. and I was just laying there in the bed. I was staring at the ceiling and my wife was laying next to me, and just quietly sleeping. And I'll tell you, she's the love of my life, man. And she puts her trust in me. Not once, she's told me several times, I am the king of the house. I am the master. And she said that in front of the kids and they hate that. They roll their eyes and it's like, oh, that's disgusting. But she means it. And, before anybody has any kind of weird thoughts about her, she's brilliant. She's smarter than I am. She's got a master's degree. She's a health professional treating people. And, she's smart as a whip, but she trusts me. And, I remember thinking, gee, if I made a great mistake here, my wealth was down, on paper, it was probably down 50, 60%. And what I did is I just started studying my ass off. I mean, I started watching podcasts like this. I started again, I was already deep in the rabbit hole. I started reading books again, same ones. I started reading articles. I started doing all kinds of stuff. And you know what? Bitcoin dropped to $17,000. And I bought like a motherfucker. And what I'm trying to say is, so for $1,700, I got a tenth of a Bitcoin. Now it cost, a $10,000 chunk. And when I'm right, when it goes to $1 million, you're going to have to come up with $100,000. So we're going to be leaving a lot of our friends here, our plebs, behind. We're on a train station. You look out there, they're standing out there. And these are people you love. They're your friends. They're people you care about. They're going to get left behind. So you got to stack. You got to stack for other people too. And I guess what I'm going to try to say is that the reason you're doing this is because someday, and it's a long ways off for people like you, but someday for me, I'll be gone. And when I'm gone, when they're reading that will, I want the people that love me, I want them to stand around in a circle and go down and look in their hand, and there's going to be a Bitcoin magically appear in their hand, and they're going to go, I've got a ticket. I can get on that train and I can go somewhere now. That's what I want. And that's what I hope other people will do.
So cool. That is so cool. I like you said, I think that's the hope of many Bitcoiners. Truly. It's funny you say that too. I think I posted something the other day about, if you wanted to, alluding to what you were just saying, if you'd have to have basically a $10 million net worth right now and $1 million liquid just to get, or sorry, it was $1 million net worth and $100,000 liquid to get one Bitcoin. And so it just shows you right there, like the train just keeps moving faster and faster. And again, people can look at that and say, oh, look, it's just the wealthy are like the only ones that can get it. And I think that's what is so misunderstood about Bitcoin, whether it's some of the environmental things, the mining, and how it's going to reshape the environment. And then also like this, like everyone wins on a neutral money where it captures deflation and energy is abundant, and what Bitcoin will do. Even the last person in Bitcoin will benefit. Kind of like we were saying in the Revolutionary War, everyone benefited. Now, a lot of people didn't fight in the war, but they all benefited from the system they now had, that the founders laid their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors down for, which is, the last line of the Declaration of Independence. And so I think that's the times we're living through. Again, Naval Ravikant just tweeted out the other day that, this is the second American Revolution. And it's funny because I've been thinking it, feeling it. I'm sure you have. I know many Bitcoiners have kind of felt that same thing. I believe most Bitcoin holders are in America, just worldwide. I mean, there's such a little adoption, like you alluded to, just globally, there is very little adoption still. We're so early, but most of those people, I think the majority are in US, at least it seems to be the case. So, it's just absolutely fascinating. But I would like to transition. We were talking offline about the Rothschilds a little bit, and just the buy, borrow, dynasty. So I would love for you to kind of touch on, because you made me just think of this, like the buy, borrow, die. We just talked about generational wealth and doing this for your family, for the people around you, your country, where you live. But I would love for you to kind of just unpack some of the background of really even the last couple hundred years of central banking, and kind of what's led us to the time we're in now, and how the system works in this fiat standard, and how the game is played, and where we're transitioning to.
Well, again, we'll just say that, often I'm wrong about things. And my degree is not in finance, but nonetheless, I can look at history, and I can talk about dynasties that were created that lasted hundreds of years. You mentioned the Rothschilds. That's one of them. You're looking at everything from the Arnault family to the royal family. And what do those stories tell us? They tell us about people who understood wealth and how to preserve wealth over time. And how they did that was they found assets that would appreciate beyond what they were being debased, and they would never sell those assets. Right now, historically, the cost of capital is around 11%. If you look at the S&P 500 over several decades now, that's a big hurdle rate. You look at inflation, and I think of inflation as the expansion of money supply, and that's 7%. It's 7% over the last 100 years on average. And I look at these numbers and I'm thinking to myself, how do I beat that? Well, traditionally, what these families that we were talking about did was they purchased land or property, and then they educated their family. And they actually did this. As the years went by, they created banks. The Rothschild, of course, the famous banking family, because that's a great way to make money, and lending out other people's monies. And we, as Bitcoiners, we have something that every bank would want. We have something when we hold Bitcoin that every nation state's going to want. We have we call it pristine collateral, and it is unencumbered. And if you look at its rate of return, it's CAGR, cumulative annual growth rate, which I forgot to mention, by the way. So as an aside, talking about a tenth of a Bitcoin, cumulative interest is really hard for people to understand. It's just difficult. And it's because it happens so quickly at the end. You can take Bitcoin's CAGR, cumulative annual growth rate, and go, if you're online right now, you can just type in reverse CAGR calculator or do it on ChatGPT and put in a tenth of a Bitcoin, 10 grand, and then put in for what I'm going to say is 20 years, okay, because that's when it just goes insane. Put it in for 20 years. Now you pick your own rate that you think Bitcoin's going to grow over the next 20 years. I put down, if you use 55% where it's gone for the last 5 years, it's been 55%. If you put that in there, it comes out to 64 million bucks. But let's just say that, and this was the pushback, and I think it's valid. Let's just say that there really are decreasing returns going forward. Now, I think that there's decreasing volatility going forward, but I'm not sure that there is decreasing returns. But let's just say you believe it and you put in 40%. It still comes out to, I think it's like $8.5 million. And if you had, in today's purchasing power, if you had $8 million, you were sitting right now where you're sitting and you had $8 million, you could use that so that you never had to sell anything again. You could keep that, if you could stay in the fiat world and use that $8 million right now, even in just short-term treasuries, you'd never have to, you'd have all the money you need right now to live for this year. And I think that we're going to have a much better system going forward. Right now, with the repeal of SOB 121, in the next 12 to 24 months, we are going to see a massive avalanche of lending products coming into our space. And I know that we all have PTSD from 22, and we're all going, and you should remember, Bitcoin does not generate yield, no yield. If you hold it on a hardware wallet, it's just like a stick of gold in my hand right now. You don't get any yield off of it. So if you're getting yield, it's coming from somewhere. And it's up to you as an adult and as the head of your world, it's up to you to find out what that yield is coming from. So if that's the case, there is a very good chance that you're going to be able to live at some point for the rest of your life off your Bitcoin, never sell a sat. And, that kind of goes in hand with my philosophy. I mean, I've worked hard for my Bitcoin. I mean, I've worked my ass off. I've sat there staring at a ceiling. I understand what I hold, and it's in my fucking fist right here. My Bitcoin's in my fist, and good luck prying that thing out of there. You're going to have to work at it. And the reason I say that is because I intend to keep it. Now, I'm not talking about circular economy where I buy some Bitcoin. I've done that. I bought it, put it on a wallet, fill and spend. I put it on a wallet, I spent it. Spent like a drunken sailor down in El Salvador. So I believe in that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the generational wealth that you store as a wealth, something to give to your family. That's going to remain with me. And as these products come along, you are going to be able to earn yield on them. You're just going to have to decide how much that you're willing to let go, how much you're willing to risk, and what you demand for that. I'm going to demand a lot. And before, people just poo-poo this idea, I've talked about this in the past. Strategy is going to become, what was MicroStrategy, is going to become the world's largest bank. I'm absolutely convinced of it. I figured that out a long time ago. And I stack like a son of a bitch for that too. I'm having fun playing with it. It's not Bitcoin, and I'd sell it in a heartbeat before I sold any Bitcoin. But it's fun to play with. I'm enjoying it. So what I'm going to say is that I intend, just as Michael talks about, using these banks that he discusses and that Hal Finney talked about in 2010. Go to the Bitcoin Talk forum. He discusses that. Tokenized banks built on Bitcoin. I intend to use them, and if they want my Bitcoin, I'll decide what I'm comfortable with, whether it's rehypothecation or if I tell them, nope, that's not happening. I want multi-sig, whatever it is, and I'm willing to get the yield that they'll give me. So I hope that kind of answers the question of, how I feel about this idea of die, borrow, or buy, borrow, die dynasty, because I just add the dynasty part of it. I think that we can do this as Bitcoiners. I think you're sitting right now, you in particular, you're going to create generational wealth. Your family's going to talk about you. Someday when you're my age, you got grandkids running around, they're going to go look at you and they're going to ask you, what did you do during the 22 market meltdown? You're going to say, I bought Bitcoin. And that kid's going to look at you and he's go, fucking legend. That's going to be you. It's going to be other people that are like that. Fucking legend. And there are people that are going to be in gratitude for what Bitcoiners like myself and others are doing right now. You got to stack for other people.
Yeah, could not agree more, George. What? So you studied Bitcoin for thousands of hours. You got in, you came back to it, restudied just to ensure your conviction of it. What the average person, and we've kind of touched on this and danced around this a little bit throughout the episode, but the average person really is not going to put that work in or have time to do it. Whatever the reason is, what has, like, how has Bitcoin changed you? I mean, because like we all have this story. I mean, like you were such an accomplished human before this, obviously in Top Gun, flying for Delta Airlines. You're painting now. Like, you're such an accomplished person. And like you said before, like, this definitely, and you look like the most interesting man in the world. So you are, and you look like the most interesting man in the world. So how is it, as the Max Kaiser saying goes, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. How has Bitcoin changed you?
Well, first off, I'm just a pleb. I mean it. I'm like an 80 IQ pleb. And think of me as a guy that's in the trenches. I mean, I got my armor on. I'm a warrior. If you've ever looked at the Emperor Shi Huang in 200 BC with all those terracotta clay soldiers, 8,000 of them. Have you ever seen that where they're buried in the ground? That is incredible. They've been sitting in there for, they've been in there for 2,000 years just waiting. And some farmers in the 70s discovered them and they started digging them up. And they tour, by the way, in the U.S. If you ever get a chance, you need to go to one of the tours if it comes to a museum near you. But anyway, that's me. I'm just down there in the trenches. There are some really smart people. A lot of people don't know this, but there's they've found 6 of them so far. There's 6 generals in there, with those troops, and they look different. And they're the smart guys. They're people like Booth. I mean, he's Jeff Booth. He's one of those guys just kind of directing people. But I'm just a pleb. But the thing is that Bitcoin's just freed me up. I used to, like I told you, before 2008, I'm just working my ass off constantly, always trying to somehow preserve, build wealth. What a pain in the ass. And now look at me. I mean, I'm sure you'll go to a full screen of my video of my, in post-production. You can see where I'm sitting. You know what? I don't have to worry about anything right now. I'm just enjoying my life. I just took up scuba diving. I'm painting, I'm creating work here. Some of these paintings you see, they'll be here for 200, 300 years. I mean, they're not going anywhere. And they're built on archival products that will last. And I'm just enjoying life. I don't have to do any of that running around on that hamster wheel that we talked about. And, I know we're going to close here in a little bit. I just want to give people the idea that, that can be you too. I'm not saying you don't have to put in work. You're working your ass off right now. You're probably going to daycare. You might be listening to this thinking, this guy's, yeah, that's for you. Well, this can be you too. I did have to put a lot of work in. I mean, I didn't get here. I didn't teleport myself from where the hell I was to here. I didn't go into a magic warp tunnel and get here. I worked my ass off to get here. So you got to work and you've got to study. And, if you don't have time, if you're busy and you're just sitting there going, man, I'm already overwhelmed, then, maybe just listen to podcasts like this, do what you can to get some, if you got a 401k plan, get something into Bitcoin. Right now, BlackRock, Fidelity, these are a lot smarter people than I am. They're recommending you hold Bitcoin inside your retirement. So do it, just get off your ass and do it. And, someday you'll be sitting here like, I'm just relaxed in life. I don't know how to explain. It's like, and I don't give a shit what these other people do. You talk about politics and stuff. I don't care. You know what? I don't give a shit what the Fed does. I don't, and that, they can print a bunch of those little pieces of confetti. I don't really care. You can do whatever you want. Well, you want to have that freedom. It's like, you just want to be free. And you want to be able to relax. At some point in your life, you're going to want to look back and you're going to go, I just want to take a deep breath here. I want to go play with my grandkids. I want to go take them somewhere and, have them sit on my knee and tell me I'm a legend and just have fun. I guess that's about it. A lot of rants.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So did you, like in your mind, what makes, what allows people to see Bitcoin and be an early adopter? And this could be for anything, really. I guess there's always early adopters. Is there something inside of them? Is it just happenstance? Is it, did you go down? Did you go straight to Bitcoin and that was it? Did you have, a lot of Bitcoiners have their shitcoin phase in the beginning? You're kind of trying to feel your way around, and then you're like, oh, you realize, yeah, you get rugged once or whatever it is, and then they're Bitcoin full time. And what was that like for you? And what do you think sets people apart, that they're just pattern recognizers? They see things earlier than others. Like, I'm sure you've given thought to that. So what is that golden thread?
I don't know if I don't think there is like any kind of universal thread really to going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. You do have to be inquisitive. I mean, you've got to be willing to learn, humble. You can't have a big ego. Maybe that's it. The ego builds walls in the mind that seeks windows. And if you just let go of your ego, the walls disappear. So you can't, you got to be humble. I love that saying, be humble, stack stats. I just love that,
Yeah,
because you got to be.
no doubt.
You can't come into this with some preconceived notion of I'm right. There are so many people that you can tell when they discuss Bitcoin that they've got a bias that they've got intrinsically entwined within their position, and they can't let go of it. They just are unwilling to either admit they're wrong by being humble and not having an ego. And that's kind of me. I mean, there's no secret here. And I just study. I just read a lot. I love reading about Bitcoin. I study the charts all the time. One last thing, just touching on charts. I follow Check on Chain. Actually, on Twitter, he's at Checkmatey, James Check, and his Substack is Check on Chain. I do follow that. I follow the charts a lot. I don't trade, but I just love to see what's going on in the network. And I can tell you right now, for viewers, I just reviewed those charts, and things are really good right now on the network, the base layer. I mean, things are just humming along. There is not a single chart that's giving me pause or making me nervous. If any of you are interested in learning about those charts, I strongly suggest you look at the Meyer multiple by Trace Meyer. I look at the MVRV Z-score, which removes lost coins, Satoshi's coins, things like that. And that's for both short-term holders and for long-term holders. And then I look at SOPR, which is kind of like the spent output. So SOPR is, realized profit and loss. And it kind of gives me those three. That's a good place to start. Kind of gives you an idea where the market is and stuff. And that's all.
I love that. So again, I was talking to you earlier about, I don't know if it was offline earlier, but just elite performers. And, obviously in Top Gun, you're around guys that are elite performers. I've listened to a lot of the Jocko stuff over the years, David Goggins. Like I told you before, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL when I was a kid and fighter pilot. So it was always, and I excelled in hockey. And so it was always pushing yourself to be more and to be the best version of yourself. What are some qualities that you saw, whether it's in yourself or others, and just, trying to diminish ego, increase your humility? And when you look around at guys around you, what were some of those qualities that people had that you admired, or you were just like, dang, I need to latch on to that thing he's doing there? Or, what were some of those things you kind of picked up over the years from elite performers?
Well, I'll probably have to close out pretty soon. And this is I'm glad we're talking about this, because ego, as a fighter pilot, I mean, there are a lot of big egos. You need wheelbarrows in a ready room of pilots to carry your ego around. And one of the funniest things about Top Gun, because, as you dogfight every day, and we called ACM, air combat maneuvering, but as you're dogfighting every day, you get really good at it. I was always incredibly aggressive as a dog, and in an airplane, I could just about rip the wings off sometimes. I mean, I was very aggressive. And as I got doing this, you get better and better. But the thing is, one of the things they taught you at Top Gun is how do you navigate other fighter pilots' egos, and how do you put your own ego in check?
Wow.
And unfortunately, by the time I got out of the Navy, and then when I started flying for Delta, my ego just kept building. And it was like I was a brain surgeon. And so I'm very, very fortunate in that I just had something bad happen to me in 2004. And I don't want to talk about what it was, but it was serious enough that I was very depressed and completely humbled. And, it was bad enough that sometimes I struggled with how to go on.
Mm.
And there were days when I would not leave the house. I mean, sometimes I just lay in bed in my pajamas. And I'm not embarrassed to say it because you know what? Anybody can have something happen to them that is the final, it's kind of like either the big one or the final straw.
Yeah.
And, my chief pilot at the time, I won't give his name out, but if he ever listens to this, I hope he knows I'm eternally grateful for him saving my flying career. And I went through that period for quite a while. And one of the things that I learned is that at the end of it, my ego was pretty much gone. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And now, I never would have discovered Bitcoin if I thought I was so smart, like a brain surgeon. But you know what? I know I'm not. And now I can listen to other people. And when they talk, I listen to them. If it's Goldbug and he's talking to me, I pay attention to what he's saying. I figure he has something to tell me. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So I do a lot of listening. And if anybody else is out there and you listen to this and you're in a bad place, just remember that you just got to keep going forward. Don't give up. Just keep going forward. And someday you'll be looking back and you're going, man, that was the best thing ever happened to me. In biblical terms, it's like you just got to sit in the ashes sometimes and get through it.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about any real good dogfighting stories or anything like that, whether it was in training, and just in that world. But also, I would love to get your thoughts on the crash, obviously the other day that happened, unfortunately, and just get your thoughts on that. And I think the videos, in my opinion, there's such bad angle videos that it make things look very weird, and just the angle that the video was taken, you have to kind of look from the pilot's perspective and vantage point. So I would love for you to kind of touch on any of those things and just get your thoughts on that.
Well, let's touch on the latter issue first. One thing I did learn in aviation is that when there's an accident, there's a lot of jumping to conclusions and a lot of blame that people want to put in certain directions. So I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is I think that there's going to be a great lesson come out of this last accident in between the helicopter and that commuter jet. And I think that lesson, and I could be wrong, but I think that lesson is going to be because, in the cockpit, we've got a warning system. And that warning system is really cool. I mean, I've had to respond to it, even with Delta, and what it does is it takes 2 aircraft that have a conflict in the future. And these 2 black boxes are talking to each other. And you can get enough warning that you can take evasive action, kick off the autopilot, and avoid that accident. But the thing is that all the aircraft have to have that on board, and it has to be functioning. And I'm not sure that's the case here. So we'll take a look at that as time goes by. And then let's talk about more fun stuff. Let's talk about dogfighting. I'll call it dogfighting because that's what everybody calls it. One of my best stories is a dogfight that didn't take place. I was out in the Pacific, out in the middle of the ocean, no land. I mean, you take off from the carrier. That's the funny thing about going on the carrier too. When they shoot you off the carrier, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it is a blast. Imagine you're in a seat right now. So picture your seat. You're sitting in your seat. You salute smartly, try to look really steely. And I would put my head back because I was always afraid my head was going to get snapped back. And that happens. So I put my head back and boom, you go. at the end of like a less than a football field, you're going 145 miles an hour. So it's a lot of fun. But the problem is once you launch, you realize, oh, I got to come back. I got to land on this thing. So especially out in the ocean, it's a little disconcerting, but you get used to it. But I was out there flying, and I was flying against the XO, Jocko. And I'm not going to give you his last name, but Jocko, if you're listening out there, I still think you're just a shit hot dude. And so it was the XO, and I wanted to show off. I was an aggressive JO junior officer, and I thought I'm going to water this guy's eyes. And we got at the pass, and you're going 900 miles of closure between the two of you. And as soon as we got there, I actually pulled pretty fast and hard. Just about, I pulled that thing right up to the max G's. I was grunting. My little vision went down to a tunnel. And I'm looking over at the other side, and we're fighting. I'm thinking, man, I'm kicking his ass here. I'm going to do it. And as I'm getting closer and closer to kind of maybe making a corner on this guy, he says, Jethro, knock it off. And it was like, whoa. So I stopped, and I thought, oh, man, I'm in trouble. What have I done, And this is the executive officer, and he's the hammer of the squadron. And I said, man, what have I done here? I was thinking I'm going to get chewed out for something. And I looked at the hard deck, and I thought, well, I'm still good. I'm not below the hard deck. And he says, don't do anything. And I thought, okay. And now he really had my attention. He said, just fly straight and level. And so I put the plane straight and level, and he says, you have the lead. So I looked, he was joining me, and I went like this, I've got the lead. And he pulls up next to me like this, and I'm looking over at him, and he's just watching. He's looking at my plane. He said, you've got fuel coming out of your plane. And so I looked down at the fuel gauge, and, I actually was pretty low, and I thought, son of a bitch. So we went back there, and what I had done is the F-18, when it first came out, I was in an early model, because you look at me, you can see how old I am. I was in the Charlie model, single seat, guys only on the carrier. And I came, and what I had done is when I pulled real hard behind him like that, the plane had a flaw in it, but we didn't know yet. And it had some tragic results. But the flaw was that in the back, that burner can where you light when you put that thing into burner, you just dump raw fuel back there, and it just, boom, you ignite it, boom, off it goes. And you can feel it. It feels really cool. But when I pulled so hard, I had broken one of those bars.
Wow.
And the whole time that I'm fighting here, I've got a big ball of fire back there. The whole time I'm fighting, it's just dumping raw fuel into the bay of the plane. I'm full of fuel. So when I came back and landed and trapped, I was really fortunate that I got aboard the first time. And I will tell you something. I climbed out of the jet, when I got to the side of the plane, one of the plane captains came up and he dropped one of the doors open on the side of the plane. And that thing, it just, JP fuel just poured out of the airplane all over the deck at our feet. It just ran everywhere. So that was the dog fight that never was, but it was one of my favorites because you know what? Jocko, again, if you're out there, thank you, bud. You probably saved my life.
Wow. That's incredible. All right, last one. I would love for you to talk about the painting a little bit. I help Aladdin with Bitcoin trading cards, and there's some incredible art that we have on the cards, art and education, and all about Bitcoin, all about sound money, freedom, principles, and we're gonna have you in here at some point. Get some of your art in here. So I would love for you to talk about the painting and what you're doing right now.
I'll tell you something. The best, I did the paintings for that book. Venice is Bitcoin is Venice by Alan Farrington. Yeah, I did the cover for that. And but what I was going to say is, that Larry Lepard bought two paintings that are really important. One, they're called Adam and Eve, and I'll try and, if I can remember later, I'll try and send you images of them. And one of the reasons he bought them was because they kind of like immortalize that period. If you remember the 21, 22 period, they put that whole thing in context. And Adam is Adam. It's a real picture of a man. It's pretty striking. And then the woman, I don't want to divulge her name, but it's a Bitcoiner we know and his wife. And she is the model for Eve. And they sit side by side. They're big paintings. And they're really cool. I would love to get those on there because they just symbolize this idea of birth of Bitcoin. And I think right now I am so excited for this next 4 year cycle. I mean, again, I don't know if people are sleeping well because I'm not. I mean, I think I've got hyper Bitcoin. What did I call it? I've got hyper Bitcoin thyroidism right now. I mean, I'm just, I'm a, I'm a, I am a, I'm a Bitcoin permabull. I'm like cast iron with balls the size of cannonballs right now. I mean, this is going to be an epic
Brass
run.
monkey. Yeah.
Yeah, brass monkey.
Oh, that's amazing. Truly amazing.
Those paintings, they're actually down. Bitcoin Magazine has them in that. I think they've got
Mm,
like a Bitcoin museum now.
there.
Larry
Got
put
it.
them on permanent loan to them so they could have them displayed.
Mm, man, that's so cool. All right. Well, I'll try to link to some of that too. I'll try to find it and link to some of that. You said the other day in a tweet, you haven't told the story about your taking on the squadron jet and walking home. So I would love for you to touch on this quick.
Well, I'll tell you something. They really get pissed. I mean, when you take the squadron jet out and you walk home from the desert, it's like, where's the fucking jet? So they're not happy. But you know, this is a great opportunity to say that anything I say today is not financial advice. And you can tell from my background, I just don't have a background in finance. My degree is in marketing. And I didn't even get through high school. I was expelled from high school, and I'm really glad that I'm very fortunate. I wasn't either incarcerated or they didn't press charges. And my parents said, you're not going back. So I went to college, and then I dropped out of college too. And I worked in the oil fields out west. I just drifted out west and ended up in an old town that was like a boom town. One of the last real boom towns in this country. I was there. There were 5,000 people sleeping in tents when I pulled into that town. And I was working in the oil fields for quite a while. And I had put in an application. I ended up a small city out west. I don't want to name it, quite frankly. There might be people still mad, but I became a cop there. And it was a real rough town. I mean, this was back in the 70s. And, I couldn't go in a bar there in uniform. I mean, they'd beat the shit out of you. And there were cowboys, Indians, miners, railroad workers. We even had gangs then, and about 8,000 college students. Playboy said that this was the partying town in America for college kids. I mean, like the hardest drinking college kids in the country. And then I ended up, after a while, I got kind of burned out after a couple of years, and I drifted south across the high plains in Colorado. I ended up down in the mountains there, and I ended up as a miner working. Not a Bitcoin miner, a real miner. I worked between all the way down to 10,000 feet. That's almost 2 miles down in the earth, and it's a different world down there. I'll tell you right now. When you're in a tunnel down there at that depth, Mother Earth only wants to do one thing, and she wants to fill that tunnel back up. And she uses rocks or water or both. And so, I mean, all day long, stuff's either popping out of the side of the tunnel, water, or things are falling down. Anyway, my life seemed like it was going nowhere. And basically, I felt like a loser. And I asked my parents if I could go back to college if they'd pay for my tuition again. And I lived in their basement, drove a cab at night in Denver down in, for anybody that's old enough like me that remembers, I drove in 5 Points, which was quite a place to drive at night. But I made good money there. I survived. And then, I've always loved flying. I mean, I've always loved airplanes. I was that stupid kid that had model airplanes hanging on his ceiling. I just loved airplanes. And it just so happened that the Navy really needed pilots at that time. And I'd already flown. I used to fly airplanes around the country, kind of like a used car dealer, just go pick them up. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I got into the Navy, and I went through a program, interesting program. And just think of Full Metal Jacket. Did you ever see that movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, think of that DI. Okay. Because Hartman, that was my DI when I showed up. And I was a college kid, and they shave your head off, and he gets like about this close in front of your face, and they fixed my ass up pretty quick. And then after that, I because of the flying experience, and I was really determined dedicated. I ended up getting really good grades. I got to pick whatever I wanted. Number one that in that class, and I picked Hornets F-18s, which, like you said, I think you mentioned it. That was in the Top Gun movie. That last one, a great airplane, just fun as hell. And then I did go through Top Gun. I got to be a Top Gun adversary instructor, so I was stationed up in another western Nevada, and did that. And then after I got out, I was hired by Delta. I flew as a Delta pilot all over the world. Ended up a captain there. And then about 10 years ago, I had a bad accident on a motorcycle that I had built, and it was a traumatic brain injury. So this is another good reason. I've mentioned this before. It's another good reason to not really pay too much attention to what I say today as far as financial advice. So again, I don't have any background in finance, and so anything I say is just my thoughts, my opinions, and just like assholes, everybody's got an opinion. So these are just mine. As far as yeah, I ejected from an aircraft one time in the Navy, and it's definitely something I never want to do again. And it was right before impact. I mean, I was really lucky. I was out doing a day dick around mission, DDA, and that kind of would probably piss off some of the viewers if they knew. But I might as well just tell you right now that, when we have extra gas, like at the end of a fiscal year in the military, the squadron will say, hey, go burn that gas up. Go somewhere, take the jet, go on a show, go do some day dick around missions, burn that gas up. And why? Because if we don't use it up, they're worried that next year they won't get the same amount or more gas for the next year. So they had extra gas, and I had a jet gave it to me, and I was out just dicking around doing basic fighter maneuvers through the air, practicing. Mm-hmm. And I was right at the hard deck, which, if you remember the Top Gun movie, that there is a hard deck, but we don't fly below it. Well, I lost control of the airplane. I heard a kind of not a snap, but more like a clunk. And I had something called a slat departure, and I departed controlled flight immediately. And I started in a corkscrew going down, and I was at 10,000 feet. In fact, I went below right away, and I knew I was supposed to eject, but I thought, well, I can fix this. I'm a pilot. Yeah. And so I stayed in the airplane, and I kept, I did all the things that I could think of, and, quite frankly, none of them worked. It just kept in a corkscrew going down. And, it's funny because at one point, I mean, I did realize I thought I'm going to die here. And I remember thinking to myself, I was so upset for the poor squadron duty officer that was going to have to answer all the phones and take care of stuff. I mean, weird things go through your mind in a period like that. And I got to the point where I didn't even have time to reach overhead, which is the preferred handle that I would like to have used. And I was in an old jet, I mean, from the Vietnam. We used those to simulate Russians and stuff at those days. Oh, and it was a bad seat. Yeah. I mean, they called it the backbreaker, and I knew it was a bad seat. So I reached down below, and I waited until the plane was kind of upside down, like pointed to the ground, the canopy, and pulled the handle. And when I did, by the time I rotated back around, I went up away from the ground. And then it was just plane, seat, and Jethro. That's what my call sign was, Jethro. And so I'm sitting right next to the plane. I won't drag this out much longer. But I was sitting right next to the plane because it's a funny story. I was out in the middle of the desert. And years later, when I was flying for Delta, I used to fly near that area. Occasionally, they'd route us to the military space. I could still see the hole down there in the ground where the plane hit for years. But anyway, so I was just sitting there. I got hit in the head by maybe the canopy. I don't know what the hell it was. It cracked the helmet. I was kind of sitting there dazed. I was sitting on my chute, and the plane's right there. It's just burning next to me, and things are popping and stuff. And it was right next to a little town, about 200 people. They were about 8 miles away or something. I could see it across the desert, and they were all been living there forever. They were probably all inbred, and who knows what was going on in that little town. But I could see like about 8, maybe 10 rooster tails of trucks coming out there, barreling out towards me. And I thought, oh, well, that's really cool. Well, one of them gets there, and he slides to a stop in all the dust there, and he's so excited. He's sitting there looking down at me because I'm still sitting on the chute, and he's just yakking away like this. The plane's burning. And I remember when he took a pause, and I was looking at him. I said, do you smoke? And he said, yeah. I said, can I have a cigarette? And so I smoked that cigarette. It was the best cigarette I've ever had in my life. Better than After Sex. It was the best. There's never
Oh
been a
man.
cigarette in my life that could ever match that. And so I smoked it right down to I think it was like Campbell's, unfiltered. I smoked it down to my knuckles, threw it down on the ground. And then I looked at him. He was still talking. And I looked at him. I said, can I have the pack? Then he kind of hesitated there. They actually had to tell me to stop smoking when the helicopter came to pick me up. I mean, I was still smoking as I got, and I didn't smoke at the time, but I was still smoking. So yeah, it was. But like I said, they do get pissy. It's like, where's the jet? And they ended up having to take a bunch of boxes and bags to go get it. And obviously, I think the biggest piece was what I got in the garage. It's a part of the tail hook. I think it's like maybe a couple feet. So anyway, that's that story.
That's incredible. Wait, so in the most recent Top Gun movie, when
Yeah.
Tom Cruise and Miles Teller run, they're in the Soviet base and they run and grab the F-14 that's just sitting there, the lone F-14 on the bombed out runway. I mean, in a movie, like, it's funny because you're kind of like, okay, that can't happen. I mean, theoretically, could that have happened in essence? Like, could they have just found the jet? Could you have just got it going and just, okay, here we go, boys? Like, could that have happened?
You know, truthfully, I mean, there's a lot of things in that movie that are not accurate.
Yeah.
Although I'll tell you something. You know what? I could tell they used real aircraft in the planes in the movie in a lot of the scenes. And surprisingly enough, the actual film the sequences where you're flying, it really felt. I mean, it felt like being back in the cockpit, and it was very accurate as far as the feeling of flying. And yeah, I guess they could have done that. Once you know how to, I flew one of the jets there. All you had to do was just press the button and the engine started and you're on your way. Now the F-18 was a little more complicated, but yeah, I guess they could have got the thing going.
That is wild. That's incredible. What was F-18 your favorite? What was your favorite fighter?
Surprisingly enough, the F-18 was just a blast. Yeah, it was a blast. And it was all single seat in those days. I mean, we didn't have any dual seats. It was just, just one seat. And so it was pretty cool just being by yourself in a fighter. But one of my favorite airplanes was the F-5, the Tiger Shark. They had one of those in the first movie. It was painted black, supposed to be and we had several, and one of them was black too. But yeah, that was a fun plane. I mean, it was one of those where, again, you just lower the canopy, press the button, you're on your way. My shortest mission in the United States Navy is in an F-5. It's about, I think, maybe 10, 11 minutes on my logbook. And we just lit the burners, went off the end of the runway, and engaged as soon as we got above the 10K deck, and then just kept fighting the whole time. And we were out of gas in like instant.
Wow. That's incredible. That is wild. So the USA aid or the USAID or whatever it's called, would that show up, the burning the gas and all this stuff? I mean, the Pentagon doesn't even pass audits. I mean, like, this is and it's how the whole government runs, which is hilarious in that people are just now, we were talking offline about how political. I mean, you've seen this world, up close, and I was a kid in the 2000s, seeing this and being like, how does no one see this scam, the money laundering? Like, what's happening? Like, you can't put two and two together. And finally, over the last 5 years, everyone's just starting to figure it out. And people are really, the last couple of weeks, obviously, just figuring out, like, whoa, the government's spending all of our taxpayer money all over the world. Like, what's going on? How has it taken this long, George, for people to figure out the scheme that our founding fathers knew hundreds of years? I mean, like, this is a known thing. It's just wild.
Well, it was Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, and it's a real thing. I mean, there are very powerful vested interests in maintaining the normal that we're in now, which is incredible defense spending. Our country spends more on defense than the next 10 largest nations behind us. It's astronomical. Nobody's close. Even China. Nobody's really close to our defense spending. And if you look at what caused that, if you just step back for a minute and kind of wonder about how we got here, in my mind, I think that when we left the gold standard, not left it, but when we really closed the final chapter to gold in 1971 under Nixon, within 3 years, we had the petrodollar system in place. And what does that petrodollar system really take? It takes violence. It takes an incredible military presence, because the deal is we're going to keep all the seafaring lanes, especially in the Middle East through the Suez, we're going to keep those open. That's our deal. We're going to enter joint ventures with you. We're going to transfer some of our technology, our fighters, our F-16s to the Middle East. We're going to be constantly involved in that world. And what have we seen since then? Defense spending has risen astronomically, and it goes up every year. We're out of money. Our country is broke. And I guarantee you that next year the defense budget will go up. So it's a really deep-seated problem, and I'd want to see it fixed. I mean, I definitely am tired of this. I it's kind of difficult to discuss, but I have a lot of mixed feelings about my military service. I ended up losing a lot of friends, and in fact, my best friend, the best friend I'll ever have in my life, I lost in the Navy. And many times I've looked back to myself, and I realize now what they were doing to me when I was going through that indoctrination course with those Marines, and they did it. I was a gung-ho son of a bitch. Flag-toting, kick-ass, Navy wannabe Marine. I mean, and the thing is that as I look back over that period, I wonder sometimes what it was for. I mean, I don't fly an American flag in front of my house right now because I'm so conflicted. And yet, I love this country. I love the United States. If you read about the history of the founding of our country, and it's an incredible story. I mean, just amazing. All those founders, all those people that signed that Declaration of Independence, they basically are putting their lives on the line. And some of them lost their lives. Some of them lost everything. They had their farms burned. They had wives that were not kidnapped, but imprisoned. And, so we have a wonderful country and so rich, but it's like we've kind of fallen off a cliff here, or we're headed in a really weird direction that I don't understand. But I think it is based on poor money, like fiat currency. I believe if we were on a sound, hard money system again, that our world would be different.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you took the feelings right out of me. I mean, it's the same way I've told many people throughout my life. I feel guilty still to this day that I never served in the military because I wanted to. I mean, I wanted to be a SEAL, Navy SEAL, or a fighter pilot since I was a little kid. And I ended up playing hockey. I was really good at hockey, and I was blessed enough to play for the U.S. national team and for a few years. And that was my wearing the flag. I always looked at that as my service, and beating people up on the ice rink for America. So that was my service.
I
Was
love
part
that.
of my service, and now I'm doing it now. Right, we're passing the Bitcoin mission along, so that's part of the duty to the country as well. But yeah, I feel so conflicted. It's funny, George, because it's like you love the documents, the Constitution, Declaration. Those documents haven't changed. Those are there. And you don't have to have allegiance to the men or women that are in the government, right? And that's what you're alluding to, where it's those things are it's first principles thinking, and those are the things that haven't changed. I think that's this conflicting mindset that many of us have of that duty, that honor, but at the same time, the people inside of it have destroyed so much of that. Like you said, because of the money, the incentives have really caused a lot of that. So, and it's a rabbit hole just to go down, because I think many men are feeling that, especially men tend to feel like that more. But man, what an absolute pleasure, George. Where can people find you at? Any last words, and where can people find you?
For those people that aren't on X, or what used to be Twitter, you can just type my name in the internet, Google. I'm the first thing that comes up. And then if you type, if you go to X, just type in @Jethro. That used to be my call sign, and it's capital JETHROE, and then 111. I have no idea why I stuck 111 on the under, but @Jethro 111.
Oh man, you ever get to fly in an F-111?
No, they wouldn't let me in there. On that's too advanced. You probably have to be smart to fly that.
Well, I guess that's Air Force too, right? So that's
yeah, it is.
Navy probably didn't have those. Amazing stuff, George. Thank you so much for being a playable character, spreading the message for all of us. I just really appreciate you. Thanks for coming on today.
You're welcome. And everybody just remember, stay humble. Okay. Just stay humble, stack sats, and we're going to make it.
If you like this episode with George Bodine, then you're going to love the one that we just did with Larry Lepard, where he talks about the big print and lays out exactly what's going to happen in his new book when the next crash comes and what the Fed is going to do this time. You're not going to want to miss that out. Check that out here. Or you're going to love the one we just did with Rajat Soni, talking about why Bitcoin is so different than every other altcoin and what makes Bitcoin so special. Go check them out now. We'll see you inside.